we have so enjoyed having Elizabeth's Finding My Way exhibition here at the association, and it has been thrilling to hear the reactions of all the people that come through here every day. It really has, and it's fantastic to see so many of you now. But I would like to hand it over to our President of the Board of Trustees, Daphne Anderson-Dees, who would like to say a few words, and then we'll hear from Elizabeth. Thanks.
Thank you.
Sure.
Well, the whole project emanates from the universal love for Elizabeth. Her work is, much beloved as well, and has so many facets to it. We have 400 works here in the show, and yet that's only the tip of the iceberg from her studio, which I visited about a year ago, and I was so overwhelmed by her amazing accomplishment that I said to her, "When was the last time you had a show at the Washington Art Association?" She said, "Oh, I think it was 1977. And I thought, oh my goodness, we need to make a change there. And so I'm thrilled that this has all happened with the help of many volunteers, many members, and a lot of appreciative audience. It's been such a success in every way. And it remains on view until the 26th of the month. And, well, you all know Elizabeth probably better than I do, but I loved her immediately, as anyone would. So we're thrilled that you're here to talk to us today, and I can't wait to hear what you say.
Well, I had absolutely no idea how many people would come, so I had no idea how to organize this. But I thought the first thing to do is to ask if there are any questions, or what questions you might have, and if it has to do with this room or the other room or any room, and we could start there. Yes. Hey.
As I remember, you were an actress.
I was.
How did you get from acting to ceramics?
Well, when I was living in New York, and I lived across the street from the new school. So I was on 11th Street, it was on 12th Street, so I went over and signed up for a painting class, and I hadn't painted. I'd had one semester in college with all majors, and so I was always very intimidated about the idea of painting, even though I loved it. And so I went over there and painted, and I was in night class because I was working during the day. And so finally, the head of the night department gave me a scholarship, and I was very intimidated about that. And I thought, well, that's really nice, but why? And so then I thought, well, if I paint at night and work in the day, that's it. Well, there's no other life. So at that point, I was visiting a friend in the East Village, and I went up the 3 flights of stairs, or however many, and it was to the strains of the Modern Jazz Quartet, and I just felt wonderfully kind of grown up. And my friend was married to a painter, and in the house I saw a pot with some ivy, and I was admiring the ivy really, and she said, well, I made the pot. And I was so overwhelmed by the idea that, oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, I might as well take use of it. So I instantly, I mean really instantly that night, I went over to Greenwich House Pottery and signed up. Anyway, I had to spend a semester, I believe, building one pot. Slowly, every week, you'd put a coil on, and then you'd had a template. It was just a cylinder. But when I discovered it not long ago, it was wonderful. It was layered. It was earthenware underneath, and very much like the moss. And it had a glaze, a green glaze on the top, and it was full of texture. So that I discovered later, but I thought, wait a minute, it's just like what I'm doing now. Anyway, I got then on the potter's wheel and did what you did to learn, and I made nice pots, and then I talked them into taking a class with Peter Vokas, who was the big bad boy. Well, I mean, I call him that because he was a huge Greek and worked with tons of clay at once. So it kind of ruined me to make nice pots after that. So what happened after that? I don't know. My husband and I, then I got married. And then, and he worked in the theater. And at one point we did a national tour of a play called Mary Mary, which was popular years ago. Oh, look, it's Pixie! Anyway, let's see. Anyway, we worked in the theater, and then we landed in Seattle, and with the Seattle Repertory Company, and he was directing and I was acting, and it was really wonderful. And underneath where we rehearsed, it was a big, what was called the Food Circus. It was from the World's Fair, big, huge building right by the Space Needle, and they started a ceramic studio right underneath where we rehearsed. So I talked them into letting me have a key and coming in whenever I wasn't rehearsing or playing and make pots. And that was so exciting. And then they said, oh, a kiln, well, there it is, a gas kiln. Use it, learn how. And so I did all of that, and it was thrilling, especially when I could work all night, play all night, and then in the theater, and then I would have all day if I wasn't rehearsing. I'm distracted.
Sorry, Elizabeth.
By Pixie. Sorry. So I got to make a lot of pots, and then in the other room there are the porcelain pieces. I don't know, maybe behind Cheryl there are some, but a little porcelain. I was sitting next to, in the ceramic studio there, a woman from Sweden who was getting ready for a miniature exhibit. So I said, well, let me try the porcelain, and I just fell in love with porcelain and started making little pots, because then if I was traveling back to the city or anything, I could put them in my suitcase. So that got me involved in doing the little work. When I came back from Seattle, and I had to take a year, I told my husband, to wean myself from the theater so that I could then go back to ceramics. So I had a kind of a theater job, and then the minute that was over, I went back. And that's where I met Judy Jackson. And if it hadn't been for Judy, I would not be here today, because Judy opened a world for me. She'd gone to Penland School in North Carolina, which is a fantastic craft school, and she'd also done a fair, a craft fair, And I thought, well, maybe I could do that. So it was outdoors at Bennington, and I went and I got a big electrical wheel, and I went into the woods and cut down some old cedars, I guess, and hung my pots from there. And so that was the beginning, but it was also the beginning of the craft movement in spades. It was where people who really were the fine craftsmen started presenting their work. People working in fiber, in leather, in wood, and that began, and then from being an outdoor pot smoking event, turned into the Rhine Bear Craft Fair, and which was juried and all. And I was just so lucky to be working at that time so that I could step into that level. And so I carried on making porcelain, but I also was doing throwing things, and because I wasn't a great potter, I would make things like mortar and pestle and jugs and things that had a purpose, as well as doing a lot of hand building. And I would bounce back and forth between hand building and throwing, especially with porcelain. So the hand building, I have a book over there if you want to look. I would make tiny coils, and it was very meditative, and I would sit for hours. And I was back and forth to New York because we moved up here in 1970, but I spent the rest of the whole week in the city, so I would take clay back and forth, and which was very tedious, but I would sit in the kitchen, and which was drier than my studio, and work on, say, 6 pots at once, and I'd spend the entire day doing that, and usually eventually making a half a dozen pots, which I would then take back and fire, and then I'd bring them back to New York and take them around the city to wherever had commissioned me to make pots. So that was a large part of what I was doing at that point. And I was doing other things as well. I wasn't painting, but I was using clay as a teacher, really, a metaphoric teacher. And so I would take something into the kiln, say a person on a journey, and there'd be a tree and a tree. Well, one tree was dead, the other was alive. And the kiln, it would tell me so much, it would break in two, the piece. So the poor tree was left alone, and there was no getting back because the clay had broken, and so there I was left having to deal with the new tree. So I used clay that way, and you could see in the other room some of the journeys I would take, and that was just very, very important. So I occasionally would get a grant from the state. I would ask. There was a woman who loved craft, which was amazing in itself, on the Arts Council in in Hartford. And so occasionally I would ask, and I would get $1,000 to do this and that, and then I would have an exhibition at the end of the year, so I would collect things. And at one point I made these huge containers. One I could actually sit in, and then I would put them in the kiln, and I would put other little things inside. And then if you see behind you, you could see some of the results. So I would use these as saggers being a container, and then I would put combustible material inside, and then it would be like magic. You never knew what was going to come out. And then if I put different colors, a little copper or iron in, then the lack of oxygen would turn them all. So if you see in the other room bits of the color that isn't part of the clay, then you'll know that that had been a sagger fired, and then sometimes 2 or 3 times. It was a very exciting way, and I stopped doing that. I went to, there was a gallery in Stockbridge that had my work, and one of the big name potters had come in and said, "Oh, this is the best one in the gallery." And so it got sold as the best one in the gallery. And then later I went up and I saw this same pot, and it was for sale, reduced. The man had come back, and he didn't like, it was a little, just like get somehow with the slip and the firing, there might be a little piece that would come out. Anyway, he said that was defective. And I stopped doing that. I said, I'm not going to just do that. It's too hard to price things. I feel so emotionally connected to them. And it's just very, very personal. And it's a pain to have to price things. So, in the meantime, a friend said, it's time to ask for a grant if you want to get a grant. And I thought, and I had to do it immediately. So off the top of my head, I said, well, I'd like to work in a modular fashion appropriate to architecture. I had no idea where that came from. I had no idea what it meant. And I said, well, you know, I had a year to produce things. So I thought, it would be fascinating to work in neon. Maybe I should investigate that. And I really didn't have any idea, and I kept thinking of other materials that I could work. And then one day I was cleaning up my studio. Well, I have to go back and say there were things that I wanted to do. I was in China, and this was during blue coats and bicycles, and they had these little I forget the name of them. They were little communities, little compounds. And the walls of these compounds were just extraordinary, because you saw all that nature had done to the walls, and then you saw all the intermingling of the human hand or whatever that was human. And I just thought, I want to be able to paint like that. I want to be able to have something that looks natural, as if it just happened, as if everything we knew got intermingled in that one space. And then I thought, well, I can't turn myself into a painter. I mean, I can't. And I was also making paper. I was around the corner from where I lived. There's a paper making museum, and it's a mill on, well, I mean, it's a wheel on 133 if you're crossing the bridge to Brookfield. And that was where there was this museum. Well, no, I mean, it was like a museum because this man who owned it had been in Japan and taken all of the materials over to make paper, and all the machinery and whatever. And I didn't want to continue with paper because I didn't want to have to put things behind glass. So that was one thing I was doing, and I had tried to weave because I wanted to have color in my work without having to color the clay, because that's tedious to have to wedge color into clay. And so one day I was cleaning up. Oh, I know, I had cleaned out the Brookfield Craft Center. Upstairs, they were going to throw away in the attic all this junk and stuff. Well, there were some powders. And it was at the point in the American history of ceramics that powders weren't used. It was just oxides. It was just heavy duty stuff, and that had come from both England and Japan, and these macho guys who had come out of the army and taken up ceramics with the GI Bill. So it was a whole new world from what had been. And so I said, oh, well, I'm sure I can make use of these. So one day I was cleaning up, and I used these very gingerly because to me they were like gold. And I had a square within a square. It was how you would make a tile, somebody told me, and I made this. And if you took the clay and then punched through with the square, that was a tile. And so I took the square and I tore around the edge, and I thought, oh, well, that's my deckled edge like paper. And then I had this powder, and I went and I just sort of patted it to clean up the powders, and I looked at it and I was absolutely stunned. I thought, this is it. This is what I can do. This will be the modular system that I said I would do. And I went crazy doing the clay with the powders, but I also was doing the porcelain, so I was back and forth, and I found that necessary. I found the balance very good between doing the rough work and the pure work. So I went and I had an exhibit at the end of the year at the Brookfield Craft Center, and I did things like that, and I did porcelain work, and it was just very exciting. And it was the beginning because I thought, oh, instead of having to figure out prices, I could do like the fiber people did, is charge by the square foot, and then I don't ever have to get emotionally involved with pricing. So that's basically how it all happened. So then I would, well, just as you go along, things change. Like I had done those squares up there, and I thought, oh, they're weird. But then you look with things and you think, oh, maybe not so weird. And let me see, what else? it's sort of hard sitting here because so much is in the other rooms. The columns, for example, I showed for, I think, 10 years in Milton.
Yes.
In a barn, and it was wonderful. And every year or every other year, I'd have an exhibit on 2 floors that I would have to fill. And at the same time, the best thing about having discovered this was, and I'm digressing a bit, was being able to do commissions. And so I would go to the craft fair where at Rhinebeck mostly, and then it moved to West Springfield, and then it went all over the place to Baltimore and various places. And then a few places like the Smithsonian Show in Washington and the Philadelphia Museum exhibit. So I would still do some things like that. But one day, when I was at one of these fairs, someone came along and gave me a list of art consultants in California. I think they were all in California. And another friend came and said, oh, she'd make a little brochure for me. And so she came up from New York one day. She'd worked at Time or something like that, and we sat for a half an hour or so and put down together. And so I had this little brochure, and I had the addresses, and that was the beginning of being able to get commissions and work all over the country, and mostly in hospitals, which I loved the best. And it was all because of that little brochure and those lists. And I never had to search for commissions. They just came. But at the same time, I was doing all of those those exhibitions in Milton. And so in the center of the room, there's a big space. So in the center of the room always felt empty. So one year I did the squares out there in the front, and actually Chris put again moss in for me. So when I asked if he would curate this, he said, you've got to have the planters again. And I watched him make those gardens. It's just amazing what he does. Well, anyway, I would never have even thought of doing this if he hadn't agreed and said yes, he would curate it all. So I interrupted myself. Oh, I know. In the middle of the room, so one year I had that, and one year I thought, oh, it'll be fun to have columns. So I got these PVC tubes, and I asked Nathaniel Kardonsky, who was working for me at that point, and I'd say, okay, here are the colors, we'll break up the tiles and go for it. And so there was a girl from Trader Joe's who came on board, and I can't remember how that happened. Well, I let the two of them go, and they made those totems in the back, which I think are awesome. And I just let them loose in the studio, and they got into stuff like sparkles and everything, and the atmosphere was full of powders that shouldn't have been there flying around. Anyway, so that was one wonderful thing that happened. And now I couldn't exist without Tanya. Where are you, Tanya? There she is. Tanya's the most amazing artist herself, and she is so meticulous that everything she does is way better and better crafted than I would do. And so I'm just thrilled that she's there in the studio. Sometimes just I say, okay, let's do this, and I say, well, it's like this, and then she takes over and does it. So, like the planters, not the planters, the plates with the spikes in them for flowers. I don't have anything to do with those anymore. She makes those. So let's see.
Elizabeth, what were the largest scale commissions you ever did? Were they on the
we have
outside of buildings?
The large, yes. I got a call one day from someone in Chicago, and my friend Vicki Chess had basically arranged this because it was one of her old boyfriends. And he said he had to do, it must have been 1% for art, because otherwise, why would he bother? So I did this 78-foot
Wow.
wide commission. And at one point he said, quick, I've got to tell them what you're going to do. And I knew he wanted water, and I had just been who does water? Well, anyway, I'd just seen this wonderful exhibit of waves and all, and I said, I'll do a wave. And I always say yes, so I had to come through with that. So fortunately found in the bleachery in New Milford, before anyone went into it, or at one point no one was there. So I had this huge, enormous space. So I could go, and you would use a reducing glass, and I would stand up on a ladder so I could look down. And I did, I wish I had a picture of it, but I don't. In the one of the brochures, I think, maybe. Anyway, I would stand and look, and I would have to send out 25, plus 25, 30 feet, whatever, at a time, so I could never see what I was doing in the next. And so it was just really scary. And I got there with Mary. Mary helped me on that.
I glued those things.
And we took some mesh and put 9 squares on each mesh, and then so I could send out little boxes like that. And, it was fun, but I mean, thinking it through is mostly, I think like everything else, it's solving problems is the most exciting part of whatever we do. And so solving problems like that was really amazing. So let me see, what else? What can I tell you?
Would you talk a little bit about the bird skeleton pieces?
The what?
The bird skeletons, the pieces with the birds embedded in them.
Oh, my birds. Oh, yes. When I just moved to the country, and I was making little porcelain not clothes forks, with lids. And I was devastated when my cat had killed a mouse. And I thought, well, I'll give it a proper burial. And I put it in this pot, and then I fired it, and it came out, and it looked almost like glass. And I thought, it's calcium. It's just calcium. And the eggshells are calcium. And the idea that the skeleton was the same as the shell is just amazing to me. Anyway, then, you know, it got more adventuresome. Then there was the chipmunk. So I had a bigger plot for the chipmunk. And then I discovered the most perfect skeleton. It was just fabulous, perfect. And so then I thought, well, the next time it was a bird, and I thought, then I got the idea, because I thought it's a little grotesque to have to open a lid and find a dead something. So I thought, well, maybe if I pressed it into the clay, the bird, then you wouldn't have to open something, it could just be there.
Fossil-like.
So then I figured out that it would make if the bird was frozen, it would make a better impression. I found I could only do this if I was in a very special place, because otherwise it would feel grotesque to me. And so I couldn't do it very often. But when I did, and when I learned that I also could take an impression on one side, also on the other side, and make a book. I think, yes, over there in the window is one, and on the wall there are some there. And I don't know what that sound is. Anyway, do you want to, well, it's hard to walk through, but if there are any other thoughts about what's in there that I haven't addressed. Oh, I know, the fruit. Yes, one day I had a couple of pears in a plate. And I seldom do this, but I got so excited I had to run to the studio and take clay, which I already, no, I guess I didn't. It was probably wet, and paint on it. And it really started with my friend Carol Anthony, who painted usually one pear. And I thought, that's not right, you know. Conversation, two. It should be two or three or more.
Pair of pears.
Pair of pears. And so this came out of the kiln, and you could sort of see there were pears, and I thought, well, I'm not a painter, and I'm not going to really be able to express what I want to express just with paint, even though I would put powders on it, and so it would look old. And so I got the idea that I would just stretch the clay. So I took the wet clay and I would paint the whatever it was, and put the colors on, dip it into the powders, which both, it sort of alleviated having to be specific, and because I was always insecure at my painting abilities, this just felt good. And so I would sculpt, basically, that the pears, or you could see in the other room. And then I thought, well, I could take it further. I could make the actual fruit and put it in. So I made molds, half molds. I never made complicated molds. Oh, actually, somebody did make me a 3-part mold, and I did that. But that was fun to do that, and it was simple to make a mold, and so that's how those are all done. So,
Elizabeth, can you talk about your inspiration for the staircases?
for what?
The staircases? The pieces
Staircases.
that you have the stairs in?
Oh, the stairs? I don't know. I was telling Daphne one day, it just popped into my head, that as a child I went to the theater. I was in Detroit visiting my grandmother, and I was very young. And there was a movie, and I'm sure it was a Shirley Temple movie, and I've looked for it ever since, where there was a staircase. And then my grandmother put her arm through glass, and so that was very traumatic. I don't remember much about it, but I just remember being in the movie theater and the stairs. And also, I've always been afraid of high places. So maybe that's why I have to make these long stairs. I don't know. In the other room, there's a wonderful round staircase, and my friend Martin Edison, who's an engineer, and he would make me all these wonderful patterns. And so years ago, I would make, those that saw the Judy Black show, there was that one thing in the center where you zoomed in to see the sky. And so doing the stairs really was the same kind of thing, reaching up. Then, I don't know, the images like behind you, those, like behind Susan, there's one where I have an inner world. And I did a bunch of those first with taking clay and wrapping it around a board and then going in and again manipulating the clay. And I remember taking those to the craft fair, and it was fascinating because some people would come by and say, "That is so spiritual." And somebody else would come by and say, "Oh my God, that's sexual." Looking at the same piece. So, I don't know, but I did spend a lot of time making those inner worlds. So, let's see, what else? Because we're not there, and so it's hard for me to remember what's in every room. But it was such fun for me putting this together and asking Chris to pull it all together, because I showed him everything in each studio, because I have two. I have one for making the work and then one for putting together the work, which is, of course, when I'm doing large pieces. And so he looked at everything, and then I said, well, we need to have a scheme, because how am I going to organize everything? And so he made a diagram of that was the blue room, and I don't know what, oh yes, I had flowers or still life on one side, and flowers on the other, and this room was going to have, I don't know, I found these way in the back room, like the earthenware ones. That was a piece in the back room, and that some I'd even forgot in the blue room that I'd ever even done, but it worked. It made the wall work. So it wasn't always my favorite pieces that got here, except for the little ones. They're all my favorite pieces, and but the bigger ones had to sort of fit the scheme somehow. So, anything else?
What about your return as a painter?
What?
What about your return to painting?
Oh. Yes. Well, I love the idea of painting, and so I took Ira's class, Ira Barkoff, and I so enjoyed that. And then in the fall, we'd go painting in Rhode Island. And so after a while, Ira didn't do that anymore, but there are 5 of us that go to Rhode Island after Labor Day and paint. And I got to the point where I would sit or I would stand in front of the sky on the porch of this wonderful place that we rent every year, and I'd start painting clouds, whatever appeared, and that's been wonderful. That's been just a great gift. So about painting much else, we still do, but I'm a little insecure. But I'm hoping now to get a
Jewelry.
Oh, yes. Well, yeah.
How did you get to that?
Oh, I know because I was traveling, and everywhere I travel, and I've got, I don't know if you saw these.
Yes.
So ever since seeing the wall in Beijing, I have been intoxicated by walls. So everywhere I travel, I would photograph walls, but also I would get the beads from wherever it was, and I started getting this huge collection of beads, and I thought, oh, now I just have to put them together, and each bead will have a history, and so that's what I did. And I still have a basement full of beads, but I haven't had any time to go and work. And now I forgot, what bead is from where. But it was wonderful for a time being able to really identify each bead as I put it as to get a straight.